and most importantly, allowing me the opportunity to share my experience, my strength, and my hope with you today. And as I prayed about what I wanted to share with you, I kept coming back to that one moment in the hospital. And I remember opening my eyes after a suicide attempt and realizing I was still here. And if I'm being honest with you, the first emotion I felt was not gratitude. It was shame. And I recall lying there thinking, how did my life get here? Not just how did I end up in this hospital, but how did I become a woman who believed that this was her only way out? And the truth is, that hospital was not where my story began. See, it was years of unspoken pain that finally caught up with me. And in 2019, my marriage was ending, and it felt like my whole world was falling apart. But it was not just the end of the marriage that truly broke me. It was everything I had dealt with prior to that. I lost my mother when I was 16 years old, and she was my safe space, my emotional blanket. But when she died, people just immediately assumed I was strong. They told me I was handling it well, but what they didn't realize is that I was not healing. I was just surviving. And there is a difference. And many years later, I lost my father, and that grief felt different. See, my father had struggled with alcoholism, and because of that, he was emotionally unavailable for most of my life. So when he died, I wasn't only grieving the loss of my father, but I was grieving the relationship I had hoped that we would one day have. And I realized I never truly gave myself permission to grieve either of those losses. So I did like most people do. I just kept going. How many of us have done that? Just kept going because life does not stop. Bills still have to be paid. Children still have to be raised. And people still expect you to show up. So that's exactly what I did. I built a successful career in human resources, got married. I was a mother. And on the outside, it looked like my life was good because people saw this professional, this woman, this mother, woman that seemed to have all the answers. But what they didn't see was a woman going home every night, carrying grief, loneliness, shame, abandonment, and fear. I became so good at functioning and pretending I was strong. And I was so good at helping everybody else while I was quietly falling apart inside. And this is what I came to understand. As we can spend so much time convincing other people that we're okay, but eventually we start trying to convince ourselves of that. But I was far from that. And I could no longer outrun myself. I was emotionally exhausted. But I didn't know how to say that. And I definitely did not know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to sit with my emotions because nobody had ever taught me how. So I did what most hurting people do. I looked for something else to fill that void, to make the pain go away. So I shopped. I looked for validation outside of myself. I had marital affairs, extramarital affairs. And I wanted to just pause there for a moment because for years I used to carry that story in shame. And today I'm not telling you that because I'm proud of it. I'm sharing that with you because healing begins with honesty. And those affairs weren't just about the other men, nor was the shopping about anything. It was really about trying to fill the emptiness that I didn't understand. And today I have language for that because I was emotionally starving. And I had spent years trying to silence emotions that were asking for my attention. But I kept trying to run. And depression took over my life. I convinced myself that the people I love would somehow be better without me. So I had a suicide attempt. Thank God I was wrong. And while I was in the hospital, an inpatient for 8 days, I met two members from Emotions Anonymous. I had never heard of Emotions Anonymous prior to that. I didn't know anything about a program. I didn't know anything about the 12 steps. I was just trying to make sense of how my life had unraveled. But when they walked in with so much kindness, no judgment, no shame, just compassion. And they gifted me the blue book. And they told me about the EA meetings and invited me to the next Saturday meeting. But before they walked out their room, they gave me something I hadn't felt in a really long time: hope. And I don't think they realized it that day, but they were not just inviting me into a meeting. They were inviting me back to my life. So when I left the hospital, I knew I could never go back to the way life was. I was eventually transitioned to an outpatient program, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. And once again, I was introduced to the Emotions Anonymous program, but I still hadn't walked into a meeting yet. But I made a pact and I made an agreement with the other members in the outpatient program and said, this next meeting, I'm going to go with you. I didn't know it was going to change my life the way that it did. But when I walked into my very first meeting on May 4th, 2019, I was carrying so much grief and shame and guilt from not only what I did in my marriage, but guilt from my suicide attempt. And I remember introducing myself. And as I started sharing my story, I was in tears. And I'm not talking about the kind of crying where you politely wipe your tears away and keep talking. I'm talking about the kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in because my soul was tired. But I recall looking around the room thinking, they're probably wondering, what's wrong with this girl? But they just listened. They didn't try to rescue me. They didn't look at me funny. They didn't roll their eyes. They never once judged me. They simply said, keep coming back. They gave me something I had not had before: grace and hope. So I walked into that room feeling broken, but I realized I was not alone, and I needed that. That meeting became a place where I didn't have to pretend to be okay. I didn't have to be the strong one, nor did I have to have all the answers. I could simply speak my truth, and that truth didn't shame me. It finally gave me somewhere to begin. And I wish I could tell you that I walked into EA after that moment and immediately understood the program, but I didn't. In fact, I thought I could work the steps by myself because I had the blue book already. I could figure this out. That was my pattern. Figure it out. Handle it. Don't ask for help. And definitely don't depend on anybody. That's how I've always survived. Then I realized that's not how this program works. You need a sponsor, is what I was told. But I remember thinking, okay, who am I going to ask to sponsor me? I don't know these people. They don't know me. But eventually God placed the right sponsor in my life. And I know that wasn't an accident. That was an answered prayer. And my sponsor and I walked through every one of those steps. And she did not let me hide behind my excuses. She loved me enough to tell me the truth. But then COVID hit. So while the rest of the world was talking about lockdown, God was slowing me down. And for the very first time in my life, I couldn't stay busy to outrun myself. There was no distractions, no hiding behind my work. It was just me, my sponsor, my higher power, and this work. So as I began working my self-inventory, I discovered something that completely changed my life. See, I thought my biggest problem was my marriage ending, but it wasn't. The marriage engine simply exposed the abandonment wounds that had been there for years. The abandonment I felt after losing my mother, the grief I had never processed, or the pain of losing my father, and all the unhealthy ways I searched for love, validation, and relief. For the first time, I had to stop asking, God, why did this happen to me? Instead, I asked, what is God trying to show me about me? That question changed everything. Because recovery was not just about changing my behavior. It was allowing God to transform my heart, transform me inside out. And as most of you know, working the steps is not comfortable because you have to see yourself. You have to take accountability. And there were days where I wanted to quit because it's one thing to tell your story, but it's another thing to take an honest look at yourself. But my sponsor reminded me, Keana, recovery is not about blaming yourself, nor is it about blaming anyone else. It's about the willingness to see the truth. So as I worked the fourth step, I started seeing emotional patterns I had never noticed before. I realized I had spent most of my life reacting instead of responding. So every time I felt rejected, abandoned, or unworthy, I often reached for something outside of myself to make that pain go away. Whether that was shopping or another relationship, sometimes it was just me trying to fix everybody else. It's amazing how creative we become when we're trying to avoid our emotions. But you can't distract yourself from your feelings or your emotions, nor can you suppress them or numb them. Because eventually your emotions will ask for your attention. And mine certainly did. And I was always taught that emotions were the problem. I always wanted my sadness to go away. I wanted my fear to disappear. And I definitely wanted that loneliness to stop hurting. I wanted to do anything except feel what I was feeling. But God began showing me something different. That my emotions were not here to destroy me. They were here to reveal me. And they were pointing to places in my life that still needed healing. The fear pointed me towards my insecurities. And the anger pointed me toward all the unresolved grief that I was holding in. And the loneliness pointed me toward the relationship I needed to build with myself and with my higher power. Even my shame became a teacher. See, shame kept telling me I wasn't enough. But God was reminding me that I had always been enough. And that's the beauty of recovery in this program. Because recovery is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who God created you to be before fear, grief, trauma, or life convinced you otherwise. And one of the most powerful parts of this journey was making amends. And I don't just mean saying I'm sorry. I mean taking accountability, looking at my side of the street, seeing what I did wrong, and owning up to that. Taking accountability for the pain I had inflicted on the people around me. It was not easy. Lord knows it wasn't easy, but it was so freeing. And one of the greatest gifts God gave me through this program was the healing of the relationship with my ex-husband, who I call my husband now, was my husband. And if anyone had told me while I was lying in that hospital bed in 2019 that one day he and I would forgive each other, become friends, and successfully co-parent our son together, I would have never believed it. But that is exactly what happened. And it wasn't because we were perfect, but because healing changed how I showed up. And another deeply personal part of men's was the forgiveness work. I had to learn how to forgive my father. And you may be wondering, how do you make amends with someone who is no longer here? Because I asked myself the same question, but my sponsor showed me that there was a way to forgive him. And even though he had already transitioned and we couldn't physically have a conversation or have a hug, I was still able to make peace through prayer, meditation, writing, and surrender. God allowed me to release years of anger, disappointment, and resentment, and I deserved that. So I stopped waiting for the relationship I wish we had experienced, and I began making peace with the father that I did have. Now, it doesn't erase the pain, but it does bring peace. And sometimes peace is the greatest amends that we could ever receive. So by the time I completed all 12 steps, something inside of me had truly changed. And it was not overnight, but one step at a time, little by little. The woman who walked into Emotions Anonymous believing her life was over, she started believing her life had purpose. And I finally understood what the 12-step meant when it talked about having a spiritual awakening. And my spiritual awakening wasn't just about seeing God differently. It was about seeing myself differently and realizing that even the darkest chapters of my life can become part of someone else's hope. I had no idea that my higher power was already preparing me for the work that I'm doing today. And I wish I could tell you that that was the end, that I had never struggled again, but that's not true because we're human and life continues to happen. So as things continue to unravel and things continue to change, I was still triggered with the loneliness, the abandonment, and the grief in my life. Except this time, I had a program and I responded differently. See, I didn't run from my emotions anymore. I went back to the steps. I did my self-inventory. I called my sponsor. I prayed. I journaled. And I became honest with myself. That experience reminded me that healing is not always linear. And recovery is not something that we complete one time and just put it on a shelf. It's something that we practice. We embody it. Emotions Anonymous did not teach me how to stop feeling, but it taught me how to understand my feelings, recognize my emotional patterns, and make different choices. EA gave me the tools to heal, and that healing eventually revealed my purpose. Because today I'm an emotional literacy consultant and speaker and an author of a book titled Healing Out Loud, Reclaim Your Voice, Power, and Purpose. And people often ask me, how did you find this work? But I didn't find this work. God assigned this work to me. And yes, it began in that hospital room, but it grew through Emotions Anonymous, through the 12 steps, my sponsor, and my relationship with God. And every moment I choose honesty over hiding. Because for years I thought my emotions were the problem. But this program, I learned that my emotions were simply information because my emotions are not the enemy. I just didn't have the language to understand them. Because there is no pill to heal unspoken pain. And at some point, we have to become willing to feel it, face it, speak it, and allow ourselves the opportunity to forgive and heal. So when I think about the 12-step now, I understand it's so completely different. It tells us to carry the message and practice these principles in all our affairs. And that's exactly what I strive to do every day I wake up. Whether that's me sharing in a meeting, speaking on the stage, or teaching emotional literacy at corporate or in schools, or sitting across from a person one-on-one, I continue to carry forward the same hope that once carried me through. And I will always be a grateful member to Emotions Anonymous and forever grateful for those 2 members that walked into the hospital. They probably thought they were simply inviting me to just a meeting, and they had no idea how much they was going to shape my life. Because the woman who opened her eyes in that room couldn't imagine where I am now. But by the grace of God, the love of this fellowship, and the guidance of my sponsor and these 12 steps, here I am. So if you're struggling today, keep coming back, keep working the steps, keep calling your sponsor and trusting your higher power. Your life may not change all at once, but I promise you it will, because mine did, and yours can too. By one honest decision, healing is possible. I am living proof that pain can become purpose. Relationships can be restored, and a life you once wanted to end can become a life you are deeply grateful to live. Today, I say, why not me? Why not use my story to carry forward the hope that once carried me? So thank you again for allowing me to share my experience, my strength, and my hope with you. And I will keep coming back.